Hello world, a few years ago YouTube user 12tone made a video on melodies, giving some tips and advice on how they are built. Make sure you check out that video first, I'll put a link in the description. His approach to the subject is quite theoretical, so I wanted to give a more practical example. First of all, there are no strict rules to what a melody is and what it should be. In the end, you can do whatever you feel like is necessary. However, in my opinion, it is still important to know what composers of the past have done. Eventually, it is their work that has been developed and transformed in a lot of music of our time. There are trends, principles and preferences, if you like, that make a good melodic line stand out throughout the composition. Of course, these trends change and evolve continuously, sometimes abrupt. Just compare late Beethoven's work with that of Mozart. The differences are quite significant. The example I chose is from the Romantic era composer and melody master Felix Mendelssohn. We will study melody and harmony from his well-known and very lyrical Songs Without Words. This one is nicknamed Spring Song, if I remember correctly. To me, this music sounds very elegant and bright, a good example for how to write a light melody in a major tonality. I highly recommend that you download the score and print it. You can then put your own remarks on the sheet music. I'll give you the download link in the description. You know, YouTube is a good medium to quickly learn things, but most of the time the channels will only highlight snippets of information. And there's nothing wrong with that, but if you want to learn in a structured way, you better make remarks yourself. Okay, so let's take a listen. I have added the slideshow of the score with the indicated harmony. The sound is MIDI generated, so apologies if some notes are off. Okay, so let's go. The first 8 bars consist of 2 4-bar phrases with similar features. For the sake of simplifying things, I will call the blue phrase the first phrase or the question, and the red phrase the second phrase or the answer. If we look at the first phrase, we can see quite some rhythmic variety. It is not necessary for a melody to have a lot of rhythmic variety. Too much can even diminish the flow of it, but a good amount of balanced out rhythmic variety is never a bad thing. The next feature to notice is the use of intervals. We have stepwise movement and skips, all progress nicely in 2 waves. While the first phrase moves around a lot, the second one is more concentrated around the note B. Also notice the overall movement of notes. We start on a C sharp and the second phrase starts a tone lower on B, very common with questions and answers. Another important aspect is the tonal framework. A melody always implies harmony. The question starts on a tonic and ends on an F sharp of the second scale degree, B minor. Notice, from C sharp to F sharp, a 5th relationship. The contours are logical and comprehensible for the mind. That brings us to a very important concept called singability, at least important to me. To write a melody that is easy to sing and be memorized is very hard. Moreover, it must be interesting enough to not become dull after some time. The use of singable intervals, logical harmony, overall movement and length of the line are but some factors that determine this. For more theoretical advice, just check out 12 Tones video or Wikipedia. So the question ended on the scale degree 2. Now, the answer starts on the dominant and ends on the dominant, thus a half cadence. Let's now artificially chop up the phrases into simple cells. I'll do this to focus on certain aspects of the melody. I will also use the features of some of these cells to show connections to other parts. As you will see, a good work, in my opinion, has a lot of modific connections. The first cell has a nice rhythmic pattern, a quarter note tied with 1 16th note, followed by 3 16th notes. The first one, D, is not part of the chord. We will call this a passing tone. The second one is even not related to our tonal center. It's a connection between D and E. It is called a chromatic passing tone. The last one is E, and this is just a chord tone. In the second phrase, we can see something similar. Next cell. We jump from E to a high A. Again, a skip of a fourth, a very singable interval. Both notes are chord tones. Then we have a skip down to the 3 remaining 8 notes. E and C sharp are chord tones. D is a passing tone on a strong beat. In the second phrase, we more or less see the same pattern, but now twice as long and harmonized differently. The third rhythmic pattern and the last rhythmic pattern are only featured in the first phrase. While the first phrase ends on the first beat of a measure, the second phrase is prolonged with the use of a cadential second inversion chord of the dominant. It ends on the second beat with the C sharp resolving to the chord tone B. Your ears really want to hear this resolution because of the tension created by this gap here, where A skips to C sharp. The last melodic feature I'd like to point out here is Mendelssohn's use of an upbeat note. I'm talking about the D over here and the E in the second phrase. They are actually part of the melodic line following them. So, a quick summary. We have the 4-bar question in blue and the 4-bar answer in red. They are coupled and form an 8-bar melody. This 8-bar melody already contains most of the motifs and ideas that will be used in the remainder of this work. There is only one interesting motif left, and it's actually not part of the melody, but the accompaniment. The arpeggiated chord tones are a common factor throughout this piece. Most of the time they are constrained to chord tones, but in some passages they will be passing tones and alterations. The next 2 phrases are altered versions of our first 2 ones. First phrase in blue, harmonized a little differently. Second phrase in red, this time only 3 bars instead of 4, and it does not end with a half cadence, but with an authentic cadence. Again, our familiar upbeat, it now jumps an octave to E, which is part of a new 2-bar phrase. What can you say about this first cell? Doesn't it look familiar? Let's go back to the beginning. There it is. The same rhythmic pattern, even the same notes, but they are placed in a reversed order. The melody keeps descending in our second purple rhythmic pattern. This works good because of the octave jump from before. The tension created by the gap is again resolved by filling out the space. This 4-bar phrase transitions into a sequential passage with this rhythmic pattern. A sequence is a rhythmic and melodic pattern that is repeated and transposed up or down. It often plays an important role in extended phrases. It can bring rest and logic. but it can also be used to modulate and create tension. That is exactly what happens here. Mendelssohn constructs an odd modulation to E major. Also notice this chromatic bass line. He then goes on by transforming the sequence itself, bringing in a new color by the use of these full chords here. Take a look at the contours of this sequential cell. F sharp to B, and the next one B to E, and again from E to B. Just logic. This sequential cell, the last one of this passage, is different from the preceding cells by again the extension of a suspended fourth that resolves to the leading tone. For the first time now, we can see 3 instead of 2 arpeggiated figures in the accompaniment. The pedal tone confirms that we are now definitely in the key of E. There is some more upbeat action going on in the melody. This here is the same rhythmic pattern from the sequence, but now used in the cadence context. The upbeat motif is now used in a different way, with full-bodied chords, embedded in a rising sequence that modulates back to our home key of A major. This is the first cell of what I would call the first codetta. We have 4 bars of subdominant and scale degree 2 chords. You can view them as one unit. The motif of the first cell is repeated over and over again, spinning around to land on the dominant, where its successions are fastened. The accompaniment fades away and we are left with a mini cadenza that connects to our first phrase, with the inevitable upbeat on E. From here onwards, I will go less into detail, as things will be more obvious to you now. The first 2 phrases are repeated, then the first phrase is played one last time, but harmonized differently, as the secondary dominant of the subdominant, which leads to the scale degree 2, and followed up by more secondary dominants. This creates a lot of tension, which reaches a climax on the dissonant suspended fourth of the dominant. It even reaches a second peak on the C sharp in the following measure. So, where is this climax located compared to the whole length of the work? The work is about 19 measures long, in constant tempo, and our climax is located at measure 64. If we divide 64 by 90, we get about 0.7. I do this to demonstrate you another important principle of structure, namely the golden ratio. The golden ratio equals about 1.62. You can look up some more details on this on Wikipedia or some number file videos. The inverse of the golden ratio is about 0.62. It is this number that we need. So our climax is about 0.70 and the golden ratio is about 0.62. So the climax or other important key moments, certainly of large scale works, are often situated around this ratio. I'm not trying to say that this is the way it should be or always is, but you can check it for yourself. The golden ratio represents an ideal balance of proportions, and I honestly think that it is good to be aware of this. Not only does it give a good indication for structure of individual works, but it also applies to structure within structures, for example, melodies. I've seen some people who tend to overvalue the golden ratio and literally look for it everywhere. However, always try to keep this in mind when you try to balance out a work. Let's get back to the score and finish this analysis. The climax is repeated, followed by a rest-bringing pedal point before we enter the coda. The coda itself consists mostly of upward motion of skips on the tonic, followed by downward motions of chord tones on the dominant 7th chord. The last part is the longest pedal point in the work. The melody is similar to that of the codetta that we have discussed earlier, that is, repetitions of the first cell. The contours are just chord tones of the tonic. Some final arpeggiated figures on the tonic, with a high A here, and this is not surprisingly the highest note of the composition. It doesn't feel like the work has ended here. This is because we have a sounding C sharp in the bass, which makes this chord a first inversion. The full resolution comes with the final 2 chords, of course, in root position. Notice also the skip down from E to A. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this, but most importantly that you've learned some basic aspects and fundamentals of classical melodies. Yet, there are so many great works out there that have a different approach to melody. You should try and go analyze them yourself. Chances are that a lot of the ideas discussed here will also apply there as well. So try to remember: rhythmic cells, motivic connection, singability and singable intervals, melodic movement in waves, structure of question and answers, 4-bar structure, half cadence and full cadence, upbeats, the harmonic framework, sequence and sequential ideas, and the golden ratio. Okay, that's it for now, and I'll see you next time.